Hello and welcome back to the Rugby Paper Podcast. Today, myself and the columnists get together to discuss the new European Cup format, as well as having another stab at putting together an England 15 for the 2023 World Cup, having done exactly that 6 months ago. This time 6 months ago, roughly, we picked an England 15 for the 2023 World Cup. And now that the season's come to a close, there's plenty to talk about elsewhere as well, which we will do. But it might be a good idea to pick one and see how we compare to 6 months ago. No special guest this time. It was Lewis Moody. This time joining myself, Nick and Brendan, we've got Chris Hewett instead. Chris, you weren't there for the January rendition, if I remember rightly.
No, I wasn't, but I could catch the ball more readily than Lewis Moody.
Okay, would you say that to his face on air?
Well, to his face on air, yes.
Okay. Just as long as he couldn't reach through the screen.
No, he was the best player in the world without the ball, Lewis. I'm serious about that. I mean, he was absolutely tremendous.
And I don't think he'd mind being told that to his face either, to be honest.
The old hands at times let him down, but crikey, if anyone ever wore his heart on his sleeve, it was him. Crikey.
Well, I'm sure your selection contributions will be almost as valuable and no doubt ruffle a few more feathers given the calls that you've made on this podcast before. Before we get into the England 15, Chris, you actually just called Nick weird off air when you were inviting him to explain the whole European Cup format. Why don't we use that as our launch pad before we get into the England setup?
Yeah, well, my take on it is that Nick has the kind of strange mind and parallel thinking abilities and parallel universe air about him to at least lay some planks of understanding about the new European Cup format. I mean, I can't believe we have another European Cup format. It's unusual for it to chop and change. But I read it once because I had a strange week last week of my own. I read it once and my heart just sank at just the fundamental lunacy of the whole thing. I mean, it is so complicated.
I think what we've gone to is a change from an elite competition in which you probably had it started off, actually, the European Cup, I think, started off with the top four in each league. It then went to 5 and it then went to 6. And 6 was just about sustainable, I think. But this thing of going to the lower reaches of each of the leagues, so you've got basically the job lot European Cup, is a disaster. If you looked at the knockout stage, so we've got this newfangled round of 16, which I don't care for particularly. But if you looked at it this time round, the knockout stage of this last competition, there were 15 matches, of which 14 were won by the home side. So that tells you something about the caliber of the sides who are going away, who are obviously the sides who haven't done very well in the bloody fragmented pool round anyway. So what we've gone from is a structure in which you had real symmetry. You know, you knew you had 3 home matches and 3 away, with the pools of 4. And you knew that in rounds 5 and 6, but obviously particularly in round 6, you probably got your pool winner. Not always, but you probably begin to see the light on the pool winner. And then you got the permutation. So you got your 6 pool winners, and then you got your permutations on the runners up, which was great drama. You know, you needed mathematical geniuses on the touchline to work out the permutations as they were going on and so forth. And you got 8 teams in the quarterfinals who fully merited their place in it. And, you know, you would, if you look at the, you still get home advantage wins in the knockout stage. There'd be a predominance of them, but you also got teams turned over in that, both in the quarterfinals and the semi-finals. Didn't happen this last time. Not sure about the time before that, but the mediocrity now of the European Cup has been designed really by club owners, I think, more than anything. And you can look at one of its main architects was Bath's Bruce Craig back when they, when EPCR was created out of ERC. Great claims were made in terms of the marketing of the competition and so on and so forth, and what it was going to be worth. Bruce Craig, I think, talked about 100 million quid turnover. It was at the time, I think, about 47. It went up initially to just over 50, and that's where it remains. They've also lost the best sponsor that probably rugby's had in Heineken. They've decided that they're withdrawing from it. Not completely, I don't think. I think that they may still be one of the site the lesser sponsors or the group sponsors, but they're not going to be the overall sponsors anymore. I think that the whole story, and if you look at you talk about you had a look at this format this time round, it is very difficult to see what they're trying to do, because they've picked pools, but nobody in the pool is going to play each other. So they all play somebody in another pool. And it just doesn't, I mean, how do you get, you got that thing where fans they'd go to a team that they were playing in their pool, and then they'd receive that team. And so, you got that camaraderie and that sort of social thing in rugby. Now it's all, you go and play a one-off somewhere. You might be home or you might be away. I mean, it's just a dog's dinner. It is a complete and utter mess. And
they've abolished everything good, Nick. I mean, those home and away, back-to-back, rounds 3 and 4 were terrific. Yeah. Then you had the building drama of round 5, who's going to win the pool, but who can still get in as a best runner-up. Round 6 was an absolute mayhem. It was wonderful. You had no idea what was coming sometimes, who was going to qualify. So that's 4 absolutely gala occasions of the 6 pool matches. And then you're into, as you were saying, ultra competitive quarterfinals, semi-finals, finals. So I have no idea why they've abolished that. And it just doesn't tick any boxes now. I mean, European Champions Cup. Well, there's no champions. Bristol came 9th last year. They're not a champion team. They're not.
Nor a Bath, nor any of those that finished. It's all about money. It's all about.
But it's not earning money. It's not building.
It's not. It's totally counterproductive. But it's all about having mediocre teams wanting to be at the top table. And
how can you have a European Cup where you have the 9th best English team and Benetton aren't allowed anywhere near it? You have to have the best Italian team. And actually the best Italian team are pretty good at the moment. You ought to have a Georgian select team. Instead, we got South African teams, 4 South Africans, but no Italians, no Georgians. And it's the European Champions Cup. They still insist calling it. I mean, it's a disgrace.
So I don't know whether that's helped at all.
Well, this is a fascinating conversation because I can't disagree with anything. I mean, it just to me it beggars belief. I mean, Bren mentioned the old the old 6 pool days, and then you have the mathematical, the Stephen Hawking questionnaire, which was I mean Stephen Hawking couldn't answer it. Who had to do what? I mean, famously, Morgan Parra, I think it was, completely miscalculated or didn't realise. And he managed to drop a goal and kick his own team out of the quarterfinals or some such thing. It was I mean, it was an unwieldy format then with those 2 runners up, but it worked in spite of itself. And actually those were the sort of golden days of the tournament in many respects. I mean, you had all 6 main European nations were guaranteed some kind of representation, I think, which to go to Brendan's point, which was important, absolutely important. And it was a myth. It was always a myth that whoever was in the team with Natalia, in a group with the Italian team, automatically got into the quarterfinals. That never happened. That actually never happened. Always one, but never both. And and the Italian club rugby, particularly with Treviso, as I still insist on calling them, has taken big steps up recently. I can understand. I don't really like seedings and what have you. I can understand why people do it. I quite like the idea of blind draws and all that sort of business. I can understand why the Premiership winners, the top 14 winners, the champions, and if it's someone different, and the URC winners should be kept apart in the initial draw. The rest of it, I don't see the point of having any kind of separation mechanism whatsoever. And if you just happen to end up with a group of Leinster, Munster, Ulster, and I don't know, Saracens, then super duper.
And we did. We used to have groups like that.
Because it just makes the pool stage fantastic. All you've done is you're going out of your way to dilute the pool stage as much as you conceivably can, stick in an extra round of knockout matches. I don't mind it, but I just think it makes the organisation of the tournament quite difficult, mathematically. But I do not understand this constant. Well, I do understand it from the club owner's point of view. This constant urge to protect the powerful from the powerful, and it drives me up the wall. It's anti-sport. And the European Champions Cup, horrendously for rugby, is now the opposite of an elite competition because everyone's in it.
Yeah. Chris, also going back to something you were saying off air when we were talking about, I don't know, we're talking about how good the Ashes is at the moment in Test cricket being played, and the format of the most successful sports in the world. It's easy to follow. It's got continuity. The same with the Champions League in football and stuff. And it's just like, if you keep changing how something is set up, it becomes impossible to follow. The Champions Cup has maybe gained a little bit of momentum back, having had the same format for a few years now, and they've kind of gone and retconned that again.
I can understand COVID.
The quality of your competitions in professional sport, in any sport, but in professional sport, it is everything. It is everything. It is the foundation of your sport. If you get the competitions wrong and you mess around with them constantly, you are asking for trouble. And that's what's happening in rugby. It's happening in the Premiership with the ring fencing. It's happening in the European Cup. It's, everywhere you see this in rugby. We don't cherish what we've got. And, as a consequence, our game is being diminished.
I agree with that. Rugby just in general has a much bigger issue in this respect than football. I mean, let's be fair. Rugby union, as I fell in love with it whenever it was, the 70s or what have you, Nick, I guess probably around the same kind of time. It's a different game now. And in many respects, it's a better game and it's more dynamic and all those kinds of things. But the constant chopping and changing has basically made it a struggle to recognize it as the game that you originally fell in love with. And that is not the case with football or cricket, the two other great team sports. They are instantly recognizable. I'm not sure if you brought Dickie Jeeps back, he would recognize much of rugby union today. If you brought Don Bradman back, he would recognise what's going on at Edgbaston. And football's always been a simple game, which is its glory, and largely unchanging. That's not to say you don't tweak some stuff around the edges, but we're making fundamental changes, both organisationally and laws-wise, to the game on an annual basis.
Well, we both sat in that meeting at the Lensbury Club, where it was sprung on everybody that the ruck had actually, was now no longer, as far as what the IRB, now World Rugby, was concerned, was no longer part of the game. We argued vociferously against it in that meeting, to the extent that I think that they were really quite taken aback by the vehemence of the arguments that they were confronted with. But they pushed on anyway. And we have the results of that game now. It's a hybrid of rugby union and rugby league. It is a much more formatted game than it was. If you go back and you look, and it says, you've got to be very careful of the all our yesterdays thing, because I agree with you. The athleticism and so on and so forth in the game is at a higher level than it's ever been. I'm not sure that the skills are necessarily, which is weird when you consider, that this is a pro sport. But if you go back and you look at, admittedly, this was the high point of British and Irish rugby. But if you look at the Lions in '74, and you look at forwards like, Willie John McBride, who was on this podcast not so long ago. I mean, people like McBride would typecast as being, head down, just fundamentally workhorses, dray horses.
Practice.
But all of these guys, when you look back and you see Gordon Brown, and you see McBride, and you see the outbreak of running handling that went on with that Lions side, everybody was involved. Everybody was switched on. Everybody was there. And I feel that one of the biggest drawbacks in the modern game is just how formatted and ordained. If you watch how often in handling moves, in phase play, they keep on going in the same direction, because the scrum half has been pre-programmed to do it. And if you look on the blind side, there's one bloke in defence and 3 or 4 in attack, and they miss it every time because it's preordained. And I find the influence of coaches. Eddie Jones would be a very good example. The coach is king. I don't particularly like. I think it's a player's game. I always have. And I don't like the idea of players being coached from the stands or being coached by proxy by people coming onto the pitch with water bottles who are coaches pretending to be water carriers. I don't like it at all.
This is the interesting thing about the cricket team, isn't it? About this whole Basball thing, which we were saying. I mean, I don't buy it completely. I mean, there have been other cricket sides at the top end of the game who've sort of revolutionised the game. But it is absolutely clear that the message to the England cricketers at the moment, including somebody like Joe Root, who can play left-handed ramp shot against Pat Cummins' first ball of the innings, or first ball of his innings, first ball of the day, I think it was. And if he got out, there would have been up. And the Jeff Boycotts of this world would have said, "What are you doing? Play properly." Blah 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 blah. But it's obviously come from the coach or from the hierarchy of the side to say, "We want you to experiment. We want you to be imaginative. We want you to be exciting," in inverted commas. And if it goes wrong, then we're not going to lob you out next week, or we're not going to haul you over the coals. And that's pretty much what we're talking about. I mean, there are coaches who say, do what you want until it goes wrong. And if it goes wrong, you'll do as I say from here on in. Well, that's not quite the spirit that we're talking about. So, hey.
On the subject of skills, Nick, can I just put a huge shout out for Chiefs number 10, Damien McKenzie, who I've never understood why he hasn't been an 80 cap All Black. He's an amazing player. Against the Brumbies for the Chiefs on Saturday, took one of his trademark slashing breaks, travelling 100 miles an hour, checked, turned the shoulders, flung out a 30-yard pass that went a yard behind. And the key thing was the winger, when guy froze it on the picture, the winger, when he threw the pass, was at least 9, if not 10 yards behind the ball and just sprinted onto it. It was pure 1960s, 70s skill.
Yeah, it was a good weekend.
I agree, and enter Mac last weekend.
That's what I was about to say. Yeah,
I know he's an in and out kind of player, but that'll make a few people think ahead of the World Cup, won't it?
Yeah, glorious.
Because you're just sending out those statements. I mean, that was a fantastic individual match-winning, trophy-winning interjection.
Yeah.
And it's pretty clear that enter Mac for one is not under some kind of iron rule of you do this here and you do this there. But there's that puts him in the minority, not the majority. In a tight final with 5 minutes left, there's a fair few coaches who say, You've got the ball in this space in your own half. You do this, or this. Very few of them will say, back yourself, young man.
There was a little stat on Twitter this season for France and Toulouse. He scored 8 tries. That's more tries than the rest of the Six Nations fly halves put together in all rugby. He scores tries. He's a strike runner as well as a fly half. And there's not many of those around these days. No. I mean, I don't think Owen Farrell scored an international try for 4 or 5 years.
Well, Mackenzie would be one, and Bowden Barrett
would be another.
But you ain't talking many. Absolutely. Johnny Sexton hasn't run that far in months.
Marcus Smith would be another. I think
he was up there. Yeah, he was up there.
Yeah, but you can't trust him, can you?
We'll have that debate in a short while.
Guys, given that the cricket is almost underway, let's get into selection so that we can get back into Bazball as well. I don't know how I want to do this, to be honest. It's a little bit different without a special guest because, well, we kind of know what each other all think. I reckon let's get the dead certain starters out of the way, if there are any. I've got 3 written down, and I may as well get. So my dead certain starters, and the first one is maybe the most contentious. Maro Itoje, Freddie Stewart, and Jack Willis are my 3. Does anyone not have?
How do you possibly come up with Stewart after what happened in the autumn?
Freddie Stewart.
Oh, sorry, Freddie Stewart. Not the prop. Sorry, Will Stewart.
No, but he is picking Freddie Stewart at tight head prop.
No, Will.
Yeah, actually, that's not a bad idea.
Will Stewart is pushing Freddie Stewart hard at fullback. Freddie Stewart takes it for the moment.
Actually, Will Stewart can kick the ball, no question about it.
Yeah, he can, to be fair. God, Nick, the daggers came out there. Fucking hell.
Yeah. They're
down the barrel.
All the blades are home, no question.
Does anyone have any other guaranteed starters, or is anyone?
Well, I think Jamie George is probably a guaranteed starter. I thought he finished the season very strongly. That's not to say he's not under pressure. I'd offer him as a pretty much guarantee. Farrell will start somewhere, and I think it will probably be 10 now. But whatever happens, he will start somewhere.
Farrell's in my team for sure.
I think Farrell's my 10 for the moment. He's just a sort of 3.5 guaranteed starters because we could, if Ford plays ridiculously well in the World Cup warm-ups, could potentially see the 10-12 happen. My next question was then the main problem positions. And Chris, I'll come to you.
Well, I do understand how England have managed to get to the back end of a World Cup cycle with so few settled units. We don't know what the best front row unit is, or indeed, when I say we don't know, we all have our views on what the best front row unit might be, but it's not settled in the minds really of those who are charged, as far as I can tell, in the minds of those who are charged with picking the team. We don't know about the second team. We don't know about the second row. We don't know about the back row. I don't think we know about scrum half. I think most of us probably think that Farrell's the 10. We don't know about the best centre partnership, and we don't know about the best wing combination.
But apart from that, pretty good shape.
Apart from that, the clarity is overwhelming, and it's hurting my eyes. You know, the bright lights are shining at me. So, God, I don't know where you want to start. I mean, if you want to start with the back 3, I mean, I think Anthony Watson has to play on one wing, and I think the other wing is very much up for grabs. I'll be very interested to see how Caden Murley develops through this multi-tiered, multi-week training camp. But you imagine for an uncapped player, he probably has to play in the first warm-up game against Wales, which I think is the only warm-up before the final squad is announced. I think I'm right in saying, apologies if that's wrong, but I think there's one of those, the first warm-up game, and then the squad's announced, and then there's 2 other warm-up matches. I think from what I've seen of Murley last year, he has plenty to offer. I admire Max Malins. I think he's a very, very good player going forward. I have quite serious concerns about his defensive capacities. And in fact, Murley's one of the blokes who seems to make a habit of running over him.
Yeah.
But at the moment, if you're putting me on a spot as sort of back three, I would say Stewart for sure at fullback, Anthony Watson right wing, Caden Murley left wing.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And it was in your recent column, which I did read, that you made a sort of Nihi Milner-Scudder-esque, not in terms of the footwork necessarily, but the sort of comparison to a winger coming into a World Cup, being drafted.
Yeah, I mean, Milner-Scudder had two caps behind him. I mean, he was a complete outlier in that All Black side, which was as experienced a side as there's ever been, I think, in a World Cup final. I mean, and you had a whole bunch of people going for back-to-back titles. You know, you had your Carters and Nonus and Conrad Smiths who have been there forever. You had Aaron Smith. Joe Moody was sort of whistled in because of injuries, so he was relatively new. But you have Sam Whitelocks, your Jerome Kinos, your McCalls. I mean, crikey, they had experience pouring at them. But Milner-Scudder was one of those blokes who sort of seized the day. He scored important tries in important games. We haven't seen much of him since, largely because of injuries. But if Caden Murley could do that, and we in the World Cup in the autumn, then we never saw much of him afterwards. I think people would settle for that if he was instrumental in getting England to a final. I just think that at the moment, in a not terribly strong position for England, not terribly strong, I think he's one of those blokes who's just has the wind in his sails and is worth at least he should be in the discussion, a very serious discussion.
I wouldn't disagree with any of that, but there's even more names to mention. I mean, I think Tom Roback at Sale is a fast developing talent. We haven't mentioned Henry Arundel. Now, I think that injury he had was worse than was let on, and he hasn't quite been the same since he came back, but he's having a really good long run of training now. He has got gas and footwork. He's the sort of bloke who could come through a summer training camp absolutely on it. So they've got enormous range of players to select. I do agree that Watson is guaranteed on one wing, but the position that is worrying me really is scrum half, because I don't know where we are with scrum half. We've just had the two form scrum halves cut from the squad, Ben Spencer and Harry Randall. Now, I don't understand how this squad works. If you're going to bring them in, you want to look at them, you have to put them up and test them against the other guys that they are going to be competing for places for. That's what they're there for. To bring them in and then cut them before you've even had Ben Youngs and JVD in the squad. So they've come in. Meanwhile, we haven't had a look at Rafi Quirk yet because he hasn't been brought into the squad. Alex Mitchell, to my mind, is the best. And I would start with the scenario that you start with him. But you've got Danny Kerr still in the squad. You've got Youngs brought into the squad. But there's only room for one old hand as a scrum half in that World Cup squad. There's no batting order at scrum half. I can't see any sort of logic or seniority. And there's no sort of testing system. I mean, in the Olympics, when you've got rowers and cyclists, you bring them into these camps and you test them against each other exhaustively over 4, 6, 8 weeks, and you come up with a solution. But these people are coming in and disappearing from camps without ever even talking to each other. So I don't know if there's something we're not being told. Are they going to still be? Is Ben Spencer still in the frame? Can he come back in 6 weeks' time when the warm-ups start? I just don't know how it's going to work.
There are only so many suites at the Penny Hill Park. So there's only so many players you can have there at one time. But I mean, you mentioned Rafi Quirk, and he was a name on everyone's lips. He's not Sale's first pick at the moment.
No, Gus Waugh could even come. I mean, Gus Waugh wants to go with England, so he could even vault in ahead.
I agree with you. I think
I'm sort of the Quirk debate's an interesting one. Gus Waugh's had a very good season, but when you look at them, it's interesting. You know, again, you see how the Premiership shapes what happens for England in so many ways. Quirk was once he got fit again at the end of the season, in the quarterfinals, semi-finals, he came back into the team and they used him as the impact man. So what happened was that they played their box kicking sort of semi-attritional game for 50 minutes or so, and then they brought on Quirk. And the difference in the tempo of the game when he came on was absolutely massive. So War's got his strengths, but one of his strengths is that he can't, one of his weaknesses rather, is that he can't play like Quirk does. Whether Quirk can play like War does, I don't know. But I certainly know that Gus War can't play in the way that Rafi Quirk does, just purely because of the pace. So
I think Mitchell's the interesting one for that reason, because Mitchell is a high tempo player. It's the whole way Northampton play, but Mitchell will make some errors, but he does seem to have the full toolbox when it comes to a decent pass, a decent kicking game, and of course, I mean, in the long tradition of Northampton scrum halves, recent Northampton scrum halves, around the edges, he is a real handful.
Yeah, he is, but I mean, there are things about his game as well, and again, this is a product of the way that Northampton play. I'm not quite sure about how, when you look at the top end of the game, when you look at the international game, a lot of these scrum halves are really very dynamic, pretty robust, physically powerful men. I mean, obviously you look at the bloke right at the top of the tree, DuPont. One of the reasons that I think Harry Randall is going to struggle is purely because he doesn't have, he has everything else, but he doesn't have that physical presence. And I wonder whether Mitchell does too.
Well, I would say in Mitchell's defence, and I've been a supporter of this for a while, in a relatively bare cupboard, I actually think, I don't think there's an absolute killer international scrum half out there available to England, but at least Mitchell has rich experience of being very effective behind a pack that's either beaten or beaten up, or at least on the back foot. I mean, Ben Young's terrific behind an England pack going forward. Absolutely terrific. On the back foot, I think Ben's never been the best.
Well, look, I mean, one thing that we ought to try and do here is to establish whether for any of us, Ben Youngs and Danny Kerr are scrum halves who should be going into this World Cup as part of that 33.
There's room for one old lag.
My answer is no. My answer is that if they want an experienced scrum half, that scrum half ought to be Ben Spencer. And I've always I like Quirk. I feel sorry that he hasn't had more game time. And I liked Van Poortvliet in the summer. I thought Van Poortvliet was very, very, very good indeed. But I think that unfortunately there's arrested development there. He hasn't really sort of kicked on with Leicester or England this season, and it is up for grabs. I mean, Jerry in his column last week made a very strong and persuasive case for Spencer, but it is one of the key positions. And again, you can sort of throw the cards up in the air and see which ones come down. I mean, there's nobody has established themselves as an out-and-out front runner, and that is up to the players concerned.
I mean, in an attempt to try and get some clarity, I would say I'm going to start with Alex Mitchell as a first choice if we're doing selections. I think Rafi Quirk is definitely the best impact guy to have on the bench. But if you're going to have an old lag, I think you take 3 scrum half, don't you? If you haven't have an old lag, it's either Danny
didn't last time round.
Or no, he didn't. Ben Youngs or Ben Spencer. And it's interesting that you don't class Ben Spencer as the old lag, and he's more of the, he's nowhere near as old as the other two, is he? Or is it experienced internationally?
Well, he's not, but he's 30. He'll be 31 by the time the World Cup.
And he's played in Saracens teams that have won huge tournaments and that.
Yeah.
But I think it will be one of those 3: Spencer, Kerr, Youngs. I'm going for Rafi Quirk as the dynamic guy off the bench, and Alex Mitchell is my starter. But I can see them starting with the old lag.
Oh, can you?
Yeah. Steve Borthwick team. I can see Ben Young starting big matches.
Should we put Mitchell in as a starter? Because it seems I've got him as my starter for the moment. Chris, I know you would as well. Nick, do you object to that?
Yeah.
No, I would. I'd go at the moment. I think I'd go with Spencer.
You'd go with You do it, so you would go with Spencer.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we're 3-1 in favor of Mitchell. So we'll stick with Mitchell just for the democracy. Let's get a left winger because we don't currently have one. I've got Anthony Watson on the right wing. Left winger, Chris, you floated Murley. Brendan, you floated Arundel. I've got a ton of names written down as well. Tom Roebuck is one. Max Malins, Ollie Thorley, Adam Radwan, obviously. Nick, you were calling in your a piece you wrote a little while ago for Joe Thocken-Singer to come back in.
Very definitely.
So as a starter or just
look, he brings something that I mean, Roebuck's a biggish lad, but Cokanasiga brings something different. He is significantly bigger than any of the other wings that England have got. And at his best, he is a force of nature. England at the moment, their midfield is not established. It could be a combination of Lawrence and Tuilagi, could be, who knows? Slade might have a say, Marchant might have a say, but if they, physical presence in World Cups is huge. If Cokanasiga is really fit and at his best, if you go back to late 2018, 2019, he was an absolute, he was phenomenal, really, for a kid who'd just been brought in. And it's typically English how, I know that he's been out injured. He came back injured from the World Cup, and then we didn't see him for, probably 2.5 seasons. He just wasn't on the radar at all for various reasons. But if there's one country that is profligate with the talent at its disposal, it's England all the time. He should be, look, you can talk about special projects and so on and so forth, but he is the sort of player that if he can't maximize on what he's got, well, this happens sometimes. But there were signs early on that he definitely could.
Well, the other criticism, of course, he's a bit of a defensive liability. But do you think he's added to his game? I agree with you. He hit the club scene like a ton of bricks.
I thought that when he played in the autumn, I thought that when he played in the autumn, I think he played against Argentina. I thought he was arguably England's best player. He had a good game in a not very good performance. He played well, and then he was discarded again. So it's very difficult to know. I don't know whether, I don't see enough of Bath to know whether he's defensively liable, because they've got so many liabilities in defence that it would be difficult to identify him as one. But he certainly shouldn't be, because he's got every single facet that you need to be absolutely formidable in that regard.
I don't know. I must admit, I don't know enough about him to know how alert he is when it comes to defensive organisation, when it comes to the whole back three working as a unit, all that stuff. It's very interesting. The French, who like size as much as anyone, are likely to pull Villiers back in on the left wing for the big matches. Who's a squirt, isn't he? But what he does do in a Murley-esque kind of way, actually, he can win you some ball on the floor. He's more powerful and squat and powerful than maybe he looks. Murley looks squat and powerful. Villiers doesn't look quite.
I'd say that Villiers is more dynamically powerful than Murley.
Perfectly possible. I think he's some player, but what he isn't is big.
He's the best counter rucker in the French side, but what he isn't either is small. He's not a will-o'-the-wisp. And the other guy, incidentally, that they bought in for Dumortier, he is much, much bigger then I think people think he's about 6'4".
Yeah.
So, they have got a big wing option.
Yeah, they have. But I get the tail of the tape argument. I do completely. But in the end, the art selection is who's, within the pounds and ounces and feet and inches available, who's going to give you the most? Who is going to give you the most, both individually and unit-wise?
Fascinating, because if you look at the end of the season and you look at the players who have who really made their mark, people have been, so far on this, Maylands has got a fairly sort of lukewarm reception. He was electric.
Going forward, he's something.
Murley, unfortunately for Caden Murley, he was playing in a Quins side that fizzled out massively, whereas Maylands was in many ways the strike, the key strike weapon for Saracens in winning the title.
And he does have a rugby intelligence about him. I mean, he's played enough at 10 and at fullback to bring the vision thing and the rugby understanding to his game. I'm not massively against Maidens. I just simply think that he might leak you a try somewhere when you really don't need it.
And the other thing that would worry me with a back three of Freddie Stewart, Anthony Watson, and Joe Cockney-Singer is that it just lacks a bit of cutting edge there. Anthony Watson is looking quick when he gets up full steam, but he's not a gas merchant in the first 20, 30 yards. And at test level, I just feel with all England resources, one of the wings ought to be a flyer.
Guys, we've got to put a name in here. I want to get our backline completed and move on to the pack. So what I'm hearing is the three front runners for that 11 shirt right now are Murley, Singer, and Roebuck. And Arundel. Oh, Christ.
Or you can chuck Watson on the left wing and pick Maidens on the right. I mean,
yeah, that's very true.
Arundel's really difficult because we've seen what he can do, but really that was it was last summer. We saw a little bit of him in the he got over the line in the Six Nations, but we've seen very, very little of him over the course of this season. You'd sort of want him in, but the training camp will be the proof of the pudding, really.
And at the moment, realistically, can you put him in? Probably not. So I reckon let's put him in as potentially a finisher rather than a starter for the moment. Brendan, without Arundel, who's your first choice?
I like what I see with Tom Roebuck, so I'm going to go with him. But I know with democracy, I know that won't be our choice.
I don't know. Nick was quite keen for him as well. My first choice is actually Singer, who has come into form at the right time, and I think that adds a bit of, if Manu isn't fit, that adds a bit more oomph where Ollie Lawrence loses a tiny bit to Manu. So Nick, I don't know if your first choice is Singer. That's 2 votes for him if that is the case.
Look, there's so much depends on what happens in this training camp and in these warm-up games. But on what I think he can bring if he's at his best, he's got X factor, and I would say yes, Singer.
Chris, do you have any objections?
No. I'm like Nick. I'm a natural Democrat.
Singer in then. And then we haven't even got to the midfield. Bloody hell. Okay.
I wouldn't take long. Tuolangi and Tuolangi.
I've got 7 names down to fit into 2 slots. So I've got Tuolangi, Slade, Dan Kelly, Lawrence, Elliot Daly, Alex Wazowski, and Joe Marchant. Are there any other names that anyone else wants to throw in? Or eliminate straight away and say, nah, they're not looking.
Well, Dan Kelly has not been called into the squad, so I think that's a pretty big clue that he's not going to be in there.
Yeah, he's quite far down on my list. Unfortunately,
for me, this one's quite easy actually. If fit, it's Slade and Lawrence with Manu on the bench. I think for once England might finally have nailed it there, but I noticed England have managed to crop down Lawrence in the train, and he's out for 6 weeks now. But hopefully that's nothing too serious, and he'll sort of be there for at least a couple of the warm-ups.
I'm very encouraged by what Lawrence has done. Very encouraged, and one of the reasons I'm encouraged is that if you're going to insist on your truck it up man at 12, he can do quite a lot of that stuff. But it seems to me, especially when he was playing outside Max Ojomo at Bath at the back end of the season, and Ojomo, I think he's obviously not going to figure in this. But I think he's got a lot going for him. I think he does different things and sees the game in slightly different ways to your average 12. I think Lawrence, with his power and his pace and his aggression and his directness, to me, that makes him a pretty good 13. I don't have big problems with Tuolangi at 13. My problems with Tuolangi are always at 12, because I find him entirely predictable. So in terms of that, and you can mix and match Slade and Lawrence. You can do what England tried to do back in 2015 with Slade and the late lamented Sam Burgess, i.e., whenever you had the ball, you kept Sam Burgess away from it. But it was, but they mix and match. Slade would drift between 12 and 13. He became the second footballer, second playmaker when you needed it. I think they're going to need that kind of flexibility, and that's very important. If you're not going to play Farrell at 12, which I don't think they will, then I think a Slade and Lawrence combination, just with a little bit of fluidity about it, is as good as we're going to get at this late stage of the game.
Again, Slade and Marchant, pretty low key ends to the season. I think that a 6-week layoff for Lawrence at this juncture is not good news at all.
It's unhelpful.
I think that he's somebody who probably needs to find another gear in terms of fitness. I'm sure he's got it. But to get the best out of him, he needs to be really firing, and that's a concern. Tuilagi, on the other hand, Sale got to a Premiership final. Tuilagi looked leaner and fitter in those last knockings of the season than I'd seen him for a while. He was also breaking the gain line against Saracens on a number of occasions. So I don't write him out of the equation at all. I'm worried about the depth that they've got in midfield. I certainly like Lazowski, particularly if Farrell is at 10. Lazowski knows Farrell's game inside out. And he's defensively, I think, unlike Eddie Jones, I think he's a pretty, very, very sound defensive player now. And I also think he's a smart footballer all round. So, he's good news. I think Slade, Slade's obviously a playmaker, but he needs to find some form. And Marchant also. I think that they were both off, a little bit off the pace at the end of the season.
I think if Slade's, and I agree with you about Exeter in general. I mean, it all went a bit flat in the end, and the place was in a bit of a pickle on the field by the end of the season. I think if Slade drops off the radar for any reason, there's a little bit, is either too flat or not quite thin enough or whatever it is, I think Lazowski brings an awful lot of what Slade can bring. They've both got that, spent a lot of time in the 10 position. They've both got kicking games. They're both organized defensively, organizationally pretty good. Lazowski being the more aggressive defender than Slade, I would say. I think Lazowski's got a lot to offer, and I'd be slightly disappointed if he didn't make the 33. I think he carries quite a bit with him.
I think it was BBC Sport that did a pick your own England 15 recently, and the winning midfield combination was actually Lawrence at 12, Tuolangi at 13. Nick, do you think that has any legs at all? Well, it has lots of legs for obvious reasons, but the size of them, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do. I don't necessarily agree with Chris about Tuilagi at 12. I still like that idea of a 12 who is going to take you over that gain line fast, hard and fast, so that you can play off them. And that is a very English strength. That game is sort of in our DNA, if you like, in the way that we play. And if Tuilagi is still robust enough to be able to do that for a World Cup campaign, I certainly would look at it. Lawrence is not as big a man, but he can do it. He showed that he can do it. But I think that he might offer a little bit more one out. But look, there's a hell of a lot of interchangeability in phase play as it is at the moment anyway. So it's more from set piece than anything. And even then, there are lots of different moves that you're going to spring at various times. So I'm not sure who's wearing what shirt is absolutely crucial.
And the last 3 times we've made a World Cup final, we haven't had a truck at up 12.
Very true.
Will Greenwood,
yeah,
Mike Catt.
Yeah. Well, we lost 2 of them.
Also true.
Well, indeed.
Once again, we're in need of a name. I think we're all in agreement that if Lawrence is fit, he's in there wearing one of 12 or 13.
I'm going Slade. Slade and Lawrence.
Slade and Lawrence. Should we put that for the moment?
I'm sticking with Slade and Lawrence, yeah.
Yeah, I'll go to. What are you going to do, Ollie? I'll go Tuilagi and Lawrence.
See, I'm swaying towards Tuilagi and Lawrence as well. But then if we go Thokinasinger, Tuilagi and Lawrence, then it does all feel like a little bit. We've just got to truck it up, merchants.
Sounds powerful.
Yeah, it does.
It does sound powerful. On the right wing, you can put a Jersey cow.
Yeah, or you.
Same difference.
I got to say, anyone who knows me knows that that's like my perfect backline. But I'm not sure we can say that. So I will accept Slade and Lawrence, but say that if Thokinasinger doesn't come through, I'd love to see Tuilagi Lawrence given a go, because that would be fairly terrifying. I'm just not that good. Slade is not in great form. I don't think he's ever quite hit the heights in an England shirt that anyone would hope he would. We've spoken on this podcast a few times about how he should have been given. He's a 12.
I think so. I think so. Absolutely.
I think he's hit the heights, Ollie. I mean, in Dublin in 2018, Slade was immaculate. He played superbly. He
did play well, but to say he's hit consistent heights, certainly, I think would be a massive stretch. And especially in the last year or two, he was. I think he played very, very well in the 2019 World Cup as well.
I was going to say World Cup 2019, apart from the final, he was very good.
And you can't put. You're going to need some kicking somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, the kicking game in midfield is pretty important. I mean, I know the French don't have one, for instance, but you damn sure the All Blacks do.
Yeah. And then you ask the question, why has someone like Manu not developed a kicking game?
Please, it's all he can do to catch cold, man. Don't ask him to do anything else. It's just confusing.
I think Fiku can kick.
He can, just doesn't do it often.
Nonu obviously added it. Lealende's added a kicking game. I mean, yeah, it's all happened when you've been around for that long. But anyway, that's another question. On that basis, let's go with Slade and Lawrence. So we've got a back line. We've got a 7 in Jack Willis. Unless someone objects. We've got a 2 in Jamie George, unless someone objects. Brendan, you're frowning.
7 has not decided yet. Jack, the force is with Jack Willis. And fair play, what a great season, and he's now a T14 champion, out and out Jackler. You've got Sam Underhill, has now come back on the scene, a magnificent player who unfortunately hasn't been able to keep fit for about 3 years. But if he's fit and firing in camp, he immediately comes back into the reckoning. Tom Curry has been 5% off his game for about 2 years, in my opinion, ever since the Lions tour. But a rejuvenated Tom Curry is a mighty player.
Played well in the final the other week.
Yeah, you've got 3 7s there, and my fear is that they might try and mess around with Tom Curry and get him to play at 6 or 8 just to get 2 of those 3 in the team. because I think the number 6 has to be a number 6, a big beast, ball carrier, Tom Pearson. For me, you have to have that sort of player at 6. 8 is going to be either Zach Mercer, Don Brandt, or Vunipola, probably. So the 7, I think, now becomes a massive fight. And how ridiculous is it that England have got 3 such great 7s and only one can play in the position? But they're going to have to bite the bullet, just as they're going to have to bite the bullet with the 10 selection.
I go Tom Curry all day long. He's the nearest thing to an absolutely unchallengeably world-class 7 at his best that we produced.
We have to assume at his best, but I haven't seen it for a little while.
And yes, I get the thing. I mean, there's only so many times you can turn up and play like he does, and hold everything together and be 95%, etc. Game on game. Yes, he'll have his dips and troughs, but I think he's a bright player. I think he will have targeted this tournament. I think that he will be ready for this tournament. If all of those 7 candidates, I don't think any of us can hold our breath for Underhill. I mean, whether Underhill will ever be the player he was, 2, 3.
And yet they've kept him in the squad. The reason I mentioned that is that I thought he was going to be cut. He was going to be cut at this point. He's still in the squad.
I think Curry does virtually everything that Jack Willis does, plus 5 other things.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I think that Curry.
Be a bit more decisive, Nick.
Yeah. I think Curry and Willis are neck and neck. I think that they're different players. I think that Willis does things that Curry doesn't do as well, and vice versa. Curry's had a lot more international experience so far than Jack Willis has. If Jack had had the same amount of experience and hadn't been injured in the way in which he was twice, then I think we might be looking at a very, very, very much a neck and neck thing, and actually we are. So, and then you've got Ben Earl as well in the equation. The thing that I think is that turnover ball, whether we hate the Jackal position or not,
is there.
The turnover ball is crucial, and Willis is I would say, he's a step ahead of Curry in that regard. I thought that Curry played pretty well at the end of the season. I thought that he was good in the semi-final and in the final for Sale. His discipline's improving a bit, but he's a bit of a penalty magnet, Tom.
He does pick up cards. Yeah.
And look, as far as the balance of the back row is concerned, it's always crucial. But, if in a way you look at what happened in 2019, and we've got a problem because, the combination of Underhill and Curry in the quarterfinal and the semi-final was brilliant. In the final, it wasn't so brilliant. And I sort of think that you could. Willis has got enough height. Willis is 6'3". He's got enough height to give you a line-out option. Pearson is unproven. We've got to know something about Pearson before he gets there. He should get a run, hopefully, in these warm-up games, and we'll see. But at the moment, the other thing is, I thought that Ezekwe, who I think has really blown hot and cold for a very, very long time, I thought that he was bloody good for Saracens in both of those big games at 6. He's a very, very good line-out forward. In fact, he's potentially a great line-out forward. And I also like the look of George Martin towards the end of the season. He looks to me as if he's matured. So I think we might have 2 big units in Ezekwe and Martin who could come in at 6. So they've got a hell of a mix. They can actually almost choose what they want there. They've got the opportunity to have big blind sides. They've got the opportunity to have real really strong players over the ball in Willis and Curry double teaming. Mercer, for me, the number 8 thing is a huge conundrum. Dombrandt again didn't really nail it, and he looks as if again he needs to find another gear in fitness. Billy Vunipola, okay, we know what Billy can do. I'm not totally convinced that he's the player that he was. Somebody said, well, he's added more to his game, but he's not quite the bloke who can go from a standing start and sort of smash his way through a brick wall. Well, really. That's what you want.
To be honest, Billy's position is a bit weird, isn't it? I remember Bob Dwyer saying about a Bristol prop that he was so slow, he's the only bloke he'd ever seen who could decelerate from a standing start, which was quite amusing. I think that Billy Vunipola is going backwards now. I think I'd be disappointed if Zach Mercer did not, over the course of this extended training period, stamp some real personality on that place. He's a terrific footballer. His ground coverage is very significant. He's been through the fires of top 14 seasons, multiple seasons, and come out as most valuable player. He's won a title. He's done this and everything else. He is a genuinely skillful, rugby instinct rich number 8. And the one guy you haven't mentioned for 6, who I would certainly consider very carefully. I would not lose any sleep over a back row of Tom Curry at 7, Zach Mercer at 8, and Courtney Lawes at 6.
Oh no, I don't want Courtney at 6.
Really?
Courtney needs to be second row. And in fact, I think Nick actually I've forgotten Nick Azikwi. England undoubtedly want a line-out man in the back row. They just do. They always have in recent years. And he actually would be an outstanding line-out man. I think England lack a carrying power of somebody like Tom Pearson, especially since Vunipola hasn't featured. Now, Courtney is a great player, and I want him in the second row with Itoje. I want those two.
Not Ollie Chesson.
I want a fully fired up Courtney and a restored Maro Itoje is my second row. But number 6 has been a problem position for England. I want Tom Pearson to have a go. Nick has persuaded me that Azikwi would be worth a good look at. But it's an important position because they've got to decide what they want from their number 6. Do they want the power carrying player? Do they want the line out beanpole? Do they want the athlete? Do they want another mongrel? Do they want another
the best big carrying 6? Pearson is very dynamic, no question about that. I'm not putting him out of the equation at the moment because we don't know it at the highest level. But the best bloke that they've got at making yards is Martin. That is his strength. He's good at it. But look, it's what they've got is as ever they've got a huge number of candidates in the back row. A lot of them not separated by a hell of a lot. Zach Mercer, I think, from what I saw of him in France, he's a different player. He looked miles fitter than he ever looked at Bath. Miles fitter.
Yeah. And
his footwork is tremendous and pick up, but he's not the biggest 8. He's not the biggest 8. And that that sort of plays again towards having a bigger 6.
Shall we put Zach Mercer at 8? Because I think that's the only 8 at the moment that I have fewest qualms picking. Because like you said, Dombrandt didn't.
He's also the only bloke ever to go to France and get fitter.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the old tropes that's probably beginning to die a death. I think they're a fitter side than England.
True, I've never been reluctant to tell a cheap joke.
6 and 7. See, I'm of the opinion that we should be playing Tom Curry at 6 and Jack Willis at 7. But I do hear what you're saying about, especially if you have an undersized number 8. I know Zach Mercer has got a bit bigger since he went to France, but he's certainly no Billy V or Aldrit or whoever.
Or Dombrandt. He's not as big as Dombrandt.
He's not as big as Dombrandt, no. I'm open to opinions for 6.
Well, we haven't got. I don't think one name has been mentioned more than once by any of us. So
last time I mentioned an idea at 6, I was mocked and laughed at, and shot down in flames.
Who was that?
Courtney Laws.
Oh, right.
You named 4 ingredients of your ideal 6.
Yeah, and he's got them. He's got them all. I agree with you. I didn't mock you on that occasion. Every other occasion, but not that one.
Hey, things are getting really weird now. We've already had Zach Mercer getting fitter in France, and now Nick Kane's not mocking me. This is a very strange discussion.
But Courtney's becoming a bit of a Sam Underhill, and that you just can't count on him to be fit.
There is a bit of that, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there is a bit. I mean, I'm assuming we're talking about in an ideal world and everyone's fit, Mike.
Yeah.
You know, or else I wouldn't have mentioned Ollie Chesham. I mean, Chesham is clear. I mean, Chesham was terrific.
Yeah.
Until he got injured. I mean, absolutely terrific. He's the last bloke out of that side. At the point of his injury, he's the last bloke you're going to drop.
But obviously, there's a difference between someone who has an injury and someone who's injury prone. And you're going to bank on Chesham to come back. Whereas Courtney Laws, by this point, you would say he's injury prone.
He is quite.
Yeah. Hang on, is Courtney's come into the squad this week, has he?
Yes,
he must have done with the Northampton boys. Yeah.
I'm really at a loss with this one, guys.
Nick Azikwe has had 2 good mentions, and now that Nick's come into bat with Chewy, we've had 2 good mentions for Courtney. So perhaps you want to make a decisive choice.
I would definitely go for the bloke who has played for the British Lions and has captained England, and until he's ruled out because of injury issues or concussion issues or whatever, I think you would go with that sort of experience. You know, I mean, he's a hell of a, he's a proven test.
We've gone with him at 5 because the scrum, which we'll get onto in a second, always seems to look stronger with Laws's muscle behind the front row.
Yeah, I mean, Courtney is always in my team. Don't get me wrong. I just feel that you're being perverse not to pick Courtney and Maro Toji as the second rows.
Well, look, my back row. If Borthwick said he wants to play fast. Okay, fast back row. Willis at 6, Mercer at 8. Curry at 7. That's what I go for at the moment.
Yeah.
I don't think you can ignore Jack Willis. I don't think you can ignore Tom Curry and Mercer, even though he hasn't, he's got no test form. The other options at the moment aren't great.
Well, I'll go with the Honourable Nick Kaine on that one, but I do want a big beast on the bench, a big ball carrier if he suddenly needs some impact.
But given they're unproven in an England shirt, most of them, the Tom Pearsons, the Azikwe's, has he still got single fit? I don't know, 10 caps, something like that, maybe a couple more. Let's go with one of them on the bench. Let's go Laws in the second row, and then Curry, Willis, Mercer back row.
That sounds pretty good.
Yeah, Chris?
Golden Hope. But there we go. But I'm happy to be in a minority. And if you want a big beast on the bench, if it's not on the right wing, you've still got the Jersey Cow.
One other name, boys. Joe Launchbury. Is he back in the frame? I think he's back training with Quins. He's the sort of second row, the George Cruz type second row that England would quite like to play in probably 1 or 2 of the pool matches and possibly have on the bench.
I love Joe to bits, and I think he's sort of Simon Shaw unlucky in a lot of ways. But I think there's been a lot of water of different currents, very poetic, has gone under the bridge since he was last a real, a nailed on England type forward. I mean, I'm sure he'll come under consideration and he'll be discussed. And I'd love to think he might be one of the 33. He's earned it really. But whether you talk of Joe at the moment is in a starting 15. There's a lot has happened since he was in the starting 15.
He's not in the squad this week either. I don't think so.
Yeah, I noticed that. I just wondered if there was.
Yeah.
He's in Cowan Dickey land, isn't he? He's looking. He's injured, and Chesham as well. they're keeping an eye on them as they stage their recoveries from their latest ailments.
One other name I've just clocked that we haven't mentioned in the context of the back row is Lewis Ludlam, who is also without doubt an option at 8.
But he's bound to go. He's bound to try.
He will be in this. Yes, exactly.
He's your all-purpose backup man.
Well, he's protean, isn't he?
Yeah. He'll be in there. Well, not in the starting lineup necessarily, but he'll certainly be in the discussions where 6, 7, or 8 really.
Yeah. I mean, he's a Richard Hill without not without the talent. That'd be really harsh, but he does have that. He does offer that range of expertise, and also a little bit like a couple of the guys we was talking about earlier. I mean, well, and indeed Lewis Moody. Nobody wears it more proudly than him. Crikey, he gets stuck in. Yeah. I admire the bloke's energy and commitment and optimism and just general effervescence. I think you
want him in the camp, don't you? You want him in the camp for 5 weeks.
He's been tremendous. He's been tremendous. You know, in a rough period selection wise, at times he's been terrific.
Yeah, but it's a hugely congested area. There are so many.
Yeah, and you have there are people like and in this whole back 5 discussion, I'm talking about the 2 Hill. I mean, there's Ted Hill hanging around, who we know Borthwick likes, and is in the squad at the moment, and of course Johnny Hill in the second row side of things. So it is the back 5 of the scrum is massively congested.
Have England ever gone into a World Cup with so few starters nailed on?
No, I can't remember a time. I mean, 2007 was a weird. 2007 was a weird old spell because they actually. I mean, Brian Ashton was sort of. He was struggling for scrum halves, and there were horrendous injuries at the start, weren't there? And I mean, it was a very strange period. That whole period. So that's the nearest I can remember. The 2003 squad, there were a couple of relative latecomers, weren't there, in the World Cup winning squad. Trevor Woodman hadn't won stacks of caps. Neither had Steve Thompson, I don't think. He'd not won hundreds, that's for sure.
And Josh Lucy had just come in from the cold, hadn't he?
And Josh, but everyone else had been there for a fair old time. So yes, I think this is unusual, and it's not as though the cupboard is bare. The cupboard is just full of people that you can't quite distinguish between, which doesn't make it any easier.
I'm starting to get a headache from too many names and too much difficulty. So let's no Ludlam in there, but certainly that was a bit of an oversight. So apologies for not mentioning him earlier. It's OJ Laws, Curry, Willis Mercer, or Willis Curry. It doesn't matter, 6 or 7. Front row. Have we got Jamie George at hooker? I had a lot of hookers down just in terms of bolters. We were obviously singing Theo Dan's praises after the Premiership final a few weeks ago.
Yeah,
he's got some zip about him. He does have some zip about him, actually.
Yeah, he does.
And I think he's been very impressive from what I've seen. Really, very good. And if you were going to pick 3. And Cowan Dickey is fit, and who knows with him? I mean, crikey. Then Dan might be the uncapped bolter. George McGuigan played very, very well actually the last time I saw him play. But yeah, I like Dan. He's playing with a side on a roll, mind you, but he's lively. Very lively.
I have 9 names down here. I think 9, maybe 8 for 3 hooker spots, which it's just insane. Nick, I know you're a fan of Tom Dunn.
No,
Jamie. I know you're a fan of one of Jamie.
I'm not a. I don't dismiss him at all, but I don't think that he's quite there at test level.
Never mind. Jamie Blameyer, I think you are a fan of.
He very much so.
Yeah.
And he will be a better player in a better team. Yeah. Lamar, as he goes up and plays better quality rugby, he gets better.
So either way, I think we've got Jamie George as our starter. We can't say any of those names, because I've got Theo Dan, Nick Dolly, Jack Walker, Tom Dunn, Jamie Blamire, George McGuigan, Luke Cowan-Dickey, Jamie George as 8 names. Nick looks like he has something to say, but he's frozen.
Yeah.
Brendan, Chris, any objections to Jamie George as our starter for the
No,
moment?
not at all. I think Jamie's back in charge.
And also he seems to me to be a big figure off the field as well.
Yeah.
I mean, he's sort of the world's nicest bloke, isn't he? He's doesn't seem to me to be one of life's natural egotists. He's I think he's been terrific. I remember arguing with Stuart Lancaster that he should have been picked for 2015. He was, of course, eventually picked for 2015 World Cup when Dylan Hartley managed to nod himself out of the equation. But Jamie's terrific, and it was no surprise to me when he came from behind the field to win the Lions starting places in 2017. I mean, it may be that he's just over the hill a little bit. Jamie, I mean, he's had a long stint in a tough position, but I do think that just his whole sort of approach and body language and what have you, and as a technician, that's the last thing that goes. He might fall off the old tackle now, but scrum line out ain't many better.
Nick's disappeared. I think he's had some connection issues. So just as we were going to bring him in for the front row, he's decided he doesn't fancy it.
Yeah.
I will just say, right, give me both of your props, Chris.
Ellis Genge, Carl Sinclair. However, yes, Ellis Genge, Carl Sinclair. So my caveat is Ellis Genge, no question. I don't have a problem with him at all. Although I think people like Rapava, Ruskin, and what have got plenty to prove, and they've got plenty to offer. But I think at the moment Genge is nailed on. My caveat with Sinclair is it has to be Sinclair with an Apollo-sized rocket up his rear end. Because he just makes me climb the walls. When I first saw him play, he walked around the field. He could obviously play. Yeah, I mean, this is back, pre, 2014, 2013, whatever it was, when he was first in the Harlequin side. And he was a terrific ball carrier, soft hands, rugby intelligence, just got on the end of things and in the middle of things that you maybe wouldn't see tight heads do that commonly. But crikey, he was walking around and you think, if ever you get yourself fit, mate, and properly tuned in, you'll be a world-class tight head. And I'm still saying that, and it's 2023. Drives me nuts. He's got all the talent in the world, that lad.
Brendan?
No arguments with Genge and Sinclair. Just keep an eye on Joe Marler. He seems to be fully committed. He's in the squad. I mean, if he didn't fancy it, he would have dropped out by now, knowing Joe. He's still a bloody good prop. He'll get really, really fit in this camp. Hasn't started for England for 3 years, I think, but I think he will come into the equation. But at the moment, I'd go Genge, Sinclair, assuming, as Chris said, that Sinclair is fully on it, as they say.
Marler could certainly do the old Jason Leonard roll off the 2003 off the bench when it's all getting a little bit nervy. If England somehow got to the final and they're in extra time, you could quite see Joe doing the Jason Leonard. It's all right, Clive, leave it to me. Going on, and of course, Jason was a little bit more disciplined, or if he wasn't disciplined, he was a little bit more. He was a little bit more cute in his indiscipline than Joe can be at times. No, I can sort of see Marler in a weird way playing a role because of the kind of figure he is and what have you. He's one of those guys that when you're in camp and you need that kind of elder statesman, seen it all, done it all, slapped a few, crack a few jokes, play a few practicals on people, all the kind of thing that makes a decent squad, in a World Cup environment. He may well play the role. Conversely, he may just annoy everyone and will not be worth his place. But I would hope that it would be quite good in a way to see him locking horns with the French. That would be very funny.
I know that Nick would be singing Rapava Ruskin's praises.
Yeah, he's a good player, I think.
For him to start ahead of Genge, and I reckon, I'm gonna do that purely on scrum. Well, not purely on scrummaging ability, but largely on scrummaging ability. And then you'd have Genge coming off the bench, which would be bomb squad-esque, which would be pretty formidable. But I mean, just a comment about, so when I do these things, I make, lists of all the names in contention, and obviously back row, flankers especially, there's tons. 9, there's tons. Hooker, there's tons. Tight head prop,
nightmare.
I mean, I've got Sinclair, Cole, Will Stewart, Rapava, Ruskin, and then Davison, who's obviously a bit of a bolter.
He's just been cut anyway, Davison.
Yeah, he has. And Joe Hayes is obviously is a bit of a bolter as well. So he's probably one I neglected to put on the list. But
Rapava, Ruskin has a both sides element, which is pretty damn valuable. I mean, and going back to the remarks about Jason Leonard, that's exactly what he offered in 2003. So that's important. I think Rapava Ruskin's a really good player. I mean, I'd like to see him stay fit for longer than 3 seconds. But it's I think he's a very good player, and it's perfectly possible that he will nail a place through his efforts in this training camp. Perfectly possible, I think.
Nick has rejoined us. So just before we wrap up, Nick, who's your starting front row? Well, you're starting prop, sorry. Presuming you've got Jamie George.
Yeah, I guess, until George doesn't actually cut it at test level, you have to go with him. I think that I would go for a change. I wouldn't have either of the Bristol props. I would have, I don't think, I mean, they finished 9th in the league. They probably had more wins without, when those 2 guys were not playing. I don't think that they had great international seasons at all. I would go with Rapava Ruskin at loose head. I'd give him a go because you need to find backup. I think Bevan Rodd has come on a lot. I think his scrummaging's come on a lot. He's a very good player around the field. But at tight head, Shonett did a very good job for Sale. They outplayed the Leicester front row. Incidentally, a bolter at loosehead could be Simon McIntyre on the Sale loosehead. But Shonett is not. He's not an all singing, all dancing prop. He's a prop, and he's solid. So I would definitely look at him. And the other guy that they were going to look at, that they've obviously decided not to, or he's not fit again, is Will Collier, who again, as a scrummaging tight head, is very good. And I don't know where Balmain is for Gloucester, but he had a very, very good season until he was injured. So they do have options at tight head, and they need to start looking at them.
I think Shonett's a good player. I mean, I've long thought he was a very good player. Again, injuries have messed him around, and he's, he doesn't last that much of a game often. But there again, if your bench is strong enough, then that's fine. I think Nick raises some interesting points there. While you were away, Nick, we were just making the point that Sinclair with a rocket up his rear end is sort of still my man, but he's on slightly thin ice. I do agree. And if we're really looking for a tight head outside of the equation, then the Jersey Cow is obviously a possibility there also.
I think you've milked that one for long enough.
No.
No, the other one.
Yeah. Well, that's all very good. And the reason I didn't say Jersey Bull was that so you could tell those really terrible jokes.
Okay.
Jersey Cows is displaying a lot of versatility here. Jersey Cows wants about 3 or 4 positions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I mean, he's
displaying. Eddie Jones always wanted a winger who could play in the back.
And as Ian McGeechan would say, he is a test match animal.
Can we end this pod before the puns get just worse and worse?
Yeah, I think so.
I think in the front row, we had 3 votes for Genge, although I was kind of half a vote for Genge. Yeah, Nick, curiously, your front row was exactly the same as you said back in January of this year. So full marks for consistency. Shona was a name I neglected to mention. That was my fault. Genge, George, or Rapava Ruskin, George. Genge, George, and then we could go Rapava Ruskin at tight head. Just for balance. Have I just frozen there, guys, by the way?
No, you're fine.
No. Hang on. Why Rapava Ruskin at tight head? You've discovered that he's played there in the past, has he?
I think he. Well, we said this last time we spoke about him in January, and he hasn't played there since.
It's a very, very difficult thing to do, to just, particularly nowadays, to just parachute a guy across in a World Cup year. Straight in the tight head. You may be asking a lot.
Yeah, no, it is. I don't know. It's just we were just saying how sparse the tight head options are.
Yeah, well, they could do worse than look in your neck of the woods. Billy Walker, I think, is the name of the guy, the Cambridge tight head, who was an England under-20 tight head when they won the World Junior Championship.
I read you wrote about that.
Yeah,
never heard of him. I can't lie.
No.
But okay, that's interesting.
You and many others.
Yeah, well, exactly. Let's put the Jersey Cow at 3, because I don't think we have any real consensus with the sort of 4 or 5 names that, it's okay to not have an entire consensus. Nick, I thought you might be interested to hear. I did some digging and found your England 15 to win the World Cup that you posted back in January 2020.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you remember doing that or if you remember who you put. It actually wasn't as out there as I thought. So you went Ellis Genge, Luke Cowan-Dickey, Carl Sinclair, Maro Itoje, Johnny Hill, Tom Curry, Sam Underhill, Alex Dombran. And in the back line, you had Ben Spencer, Owen Farrell, Ollie Thorley, Manu Tuolangi, Henry Slade, Joe Thognassinger, Anthony Watson.
Yeah. When in 2020 was this?
I think it was early. I think it was around January time.
Yeah, so just after the 2019 World Cup.
Yeah.
Okay.
To be honest, I think the sort of retention rate there is not too bad.
Well, you are more visionary in rugby than you are in your politics, Nick. I'll give you that.
Right.
We'll turn that around, Mr. Cromwell.
Chewy's chat has far descended in the past 5 minutes, maybe even alarmingly so. So I'm going to call it here, guys.
Yeah.
That was fun, though. I think we have something close to a 50. I'm not going to read it out yet again.
And the Aussies haven't lost a wicket.
Oh, God's sake. Scott Boland's still at the crease. Well, enjoy the Ashes, and I'll see you guys next week.
Thanks for listening to this week's edition of the Rugby Paper Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe on whichever podcast platform you use and recommend the show to your friends. The Rugby Paper is available to buy every Sunday. And to make sure you don't miss it, subscribe to our print, digital and online options at therugbypaper.co.uk/subscriptions. That's therugbypaper.co.uk/subscriptions to get all our content for as little as 14p per day.